Today on Animated Chaos.
It was said that one of the nurses or the nuns or whatever would patrol the halls with the candle. Should you not? This was an abandoned place, mind you. Should you not? I saw a candle coming down and say, if you don't start this fucking car and go. The car didn't want to start.
Now to today's episode.
Then we move on to season 2 because there were 3 episodes in season 1 that were, in my opinion, fantastic. Everything else was either silly, ridiculous, or just didn't hold up all that well. I talked about the Phantom Cab because it's the number 1 episode. It's considered the most nostalgic episode ever.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who's ever watched it, oh, I just love the Phantom Cab. Okay, but the Phantom Cab is not that great of an episode. It's a good opener, but the series has far better episodes far later on than the Phantom Cab. So we're moving on to season 2, and we've got the Tale of the Midnight Madness, and this is another Dr. Vink episode. And this is one of the few where Dr. Vink and Sardo actually appear in a solid episode. It's weird. Every time they appear in an episode, they're fantastic, but the episode itself is just not that strong across the board otherwise. Storytelling-wise or acting-wise or something like that. Something holds the episode back. So I have very few episodes where Dr. Vink or Sardo appeared on my list here, even though the characters themselves were fantastic and became staples throughout the series for a reason. Now, this one is about a small little local theater that is run down. It's not getting a whole lot of business. All they run is a lot of the older movies. They don't get a whole lot of the new stuff coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, it's not getting a lot of traffic. So Dr. Vink comes in and he says, if you show my movie, which turns out to be Nosferatu. Yeah. If you show my movie, I promise you will get a ton of business. But in exchange for showing this movie, you also, if things do actually turn up better like I say they will, which of course they do, you must give me one night a week of your choosing, or one day a week, whatever it is, of your choosing, and let me show my other movies that I have. Well, things work out as expected, as he promises they will, but then the manager of the theater goes back on his word, says, nah, we're good, and Dr. Vink doesn't take it well. As you would expect. And so Nosferatu actually comes out of the theater, drags one of the movie attendants in there, and then having seen the movie at least a couple of times, defeats Nosferatu. But then Dr. Vink pops up there at the end and says, well, it doesn't matter what you want now because I just bought this theater.
So you did all that just to buy the theater? Why didn't you just buy the theater to begin with instead of having him come out and terrorize people?
Because Dr. Vink is a mad scientist. He's out to torture people. Literally in episode 1 of season 1 with the Phantom Cab, he took the cab driver's hand as a trophy.
Just because?
Just because. It wasn't just because. It was because he couldn't solve the riddle that Dr. Vink had presented him way back when. So, as trade-off for not being able to complete this riddle, he had his hand taken, and then he showed it to the 2 boys there in the midway point of the episode.
Okay.
So we're kind of getting off base here, but point is, Dr. Vink is a mad, crazy scientist. But the actor does a really good job not making him deranged or anything like that. It's a controlled, mad, chaotic personage where he's evil but still helpful.
Mm-hmm.
He will help you for a price. He will help you for a cost. He will help you, but in exchange for something else. And so it works in his favor. You see that consistently throughout every single one of his appearances. He will always help. He will always...
There's a price.
It will always come with a price. And it's a really solid episode, especially since there is a point where they actually go black and white.
No, because Nosferatu is black and white?
Yes. Yes.
Cool.
Visually, it's so fun. It's a good episode. It's another one of those episodes where it's a simple, subdued sort of episode. It doesn't go crazy or anything like that, but it didn't need to. The acting is fairly solid, and the setting is great because a haunted theater is always a plus.
Yeah. Well, what I'm trying to say. Well, according to the character, it doesn't seem like it would need the episode with him in it to be really chaotic.
No, never. You never need an episode of Dr. Vink in it to be chaotic. It's not necessary.
Yeah. I think if it was, to kind of throw off. It would throw you off because I don't think describing how he is and what he does, you don't really need chaos because, he's chaotic in his own, but you don't let the work speak for itself, I guess is what I'm trying to say. As
It
opposed to
does.
having to do so much more. It's like
Yes.
him alone, something crazy is going to happen without it being
Yeah.
over the top.
And actually, that's one of the greatest strengths that Are You Afraid of the Dark has always had, is that because they were always limited on what they could do with their special effects and practical effects and all that stuff. Yes, visually, it hasn't necessarily aged well, but it also works fantastically in its benefit to where it's letting the work speak for itself story-wise a lot of time, as opposed to a bunch of flashy effects taking place to zhuzh it up, you know?
Mhm.
So it works fantastic in its favor. And when they do use a few special effects, they're effective.
Well, and again, you have to understand that this is kids telling a story.
Yes.
So if it goes a little too much, it's like, that's not something that an adult will come up with, not a kid.
There was always a good balance of, this is just scary enough to scare children and even get a couple of adults here and there, but not scary enough to where they're going to have nightmares for the rest of their childhood lives or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Except for maybe a couple of episodes that we will get to. All right. Moving on, we got The Tale of Locker 22. And let me tell you right now, this is probably one of the most impressive time travel episodes I think I'd ever seen.
Is it them going into a locker and transporting to a different time?
No, actually. Instead, this locker is haunted by a girl who died back in the 1970s because of a teacher who was very, he didn't really care for kids. So why he was even a teacher at a school in the first place?
That can be said about a lot of teaching now, though.
Yeah.
Like, why are you teaching if you don't have kids?
Well, he had become the assistant principal of the school by the time frame of the event taking place.
Okay.
So it was the 90s at that point. So 20 years later, he's the assistant principal. And you'd think after 20 years, he'd be a principal or something like that, which is probably why he's always so bitter to begin with. But he was bitter even in the 1970s. He wasn't checking his equipment. He wasn't keeping things up to date and proper and whatnot. So when he provided this girl in the 1970s with the equipment to do a science experiment in the science classroom, the laboratory classroom, whatever it was, he did not check a hose. The hose was for sending gas to the little fire thing.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That thing. And as a result, when she turned that gas on and lit it, she died.
So he basically killed her.
He killed her. He unintentionally, indirectly, but still directly killed her. And because they really couldn't find any evidence in an exploded classroom, really, that it was his fault, and they couldn't obviously find that it was a bad hose, stuff like that. She dies. 20 years later, this school's even more run down, dilapidated, in a really pretty rough neighborhood. And she had just moved there. Mind you, she had moved from like Paris, France. So she's got this not horrendously over the top thick French accent, but she's got a French accent, which is actually, I like it.
The ghost or the girl?
The girl in the modern era.
Okay.
The girl in the modern era. And actually, her acting was really solid, the girl in the modern era. The ghost never speaks a word throughout the vast majority of the entire episode, which is also really effective.
Yeah, because I mean, if you can tell a story without saying anything, it's pretty good.
The only time that the ghost ever spoke is when the modern day girl's friend, who was the only friend she has that they made there at the very beginning, like they just kind of clicked right there at the start. He tells the ghost, take me back to that time frame. I need to go stop this from happening. He does. He gets the attention of the teacher by just like telling him, if you don't let go of me and let me go stop this from happening, this girl's going to die.
Which girl?
The modern day girl, because the modern day girl got transferred back in time to basically take the entire time, because she is now the owner of this locker. A set of like beads from the 1970s, like those beads that they wore in the 1970s, fell out of the locker. And if she puts them on, then she gets transferred back in time. That's a detail I did forget to mention.
Thank you. But I'm like, you're jump. I don't. Okay.
I know. That's going to happen a lot. I'm skipping details. I jump around a lot. Point is, these beads transfer her back in time to the 1970s, and anytime she puts them on, so she takes them off, she can immediately go back to her time. She puts them on in order to try to actually figure out what's going on, why this ghost is haunting this locker still all this time. She goes back in time. She finally just says, all right, let me just get whatever this is done, taken care of. And she's not noticed that this hose is torn up either and is in bad, unusable shape. So she's trying to get things going. Her friend runs in. The teacher follows thereafter. He stops her from turning or lighting that gas that would have caused the explosion. takes the hose and then just shakes it in the teacher's face and says, "This is not acceptable. If you had allowed this to happen, she would have died." And at that point, they get transferred, or at least the modern day girl gets transferred back into the future.
Mm-hmm.
The girl who died is sitting there now at her desk. And mind you, the past teacher, all the people in the past think that she is the girl who died. Like, they call her by the name of the girl.
Okay.
So I don't remember what the modern day girl's name is, but she gets referred to as Candy because Candy is the name of the girl who died.
Okay.
She basically is taking the place of Candy throughout all of this as things are taking place and going on.
Okay.
And it's only after Candy is saved in the past that she just kind of takes the place of everything like that. Like, Candy takes the modern day girl's place. The modern day girl goes back to the future. Then the boy goes back to the future shortly thereafter.
Okay.
And the result is that the butterfly effect of all this has resulted in, after the boy telling the teacher that he's in the wrong business, that the teacher is gone. He has quit. He's no longer teaching at that school, period, whatsoever. And Candy has since been able to live and grow, and she became a teacher and is now the assistant principal at that school in the modern era.
And so she meets the girl that she saved.
Yes, but in such a way to where, while the kids now are like, "Oh, okay," Candy does not know these kids. She's like, "Okay, who are you? You must be new," something like that. So what's really just impressive about this episode as a whole, the fact that it's a really very tightly well-woven episode.
So it's like
of time
Jumanji.
travel. I guess
Only
you could
difference
argue
is
that.
the characters remembered each other.
Yeah, I guess you could argue that, kind of.
No, because it sounds like Jumanji
Okay.
in the sense of he got trapped in the game. They thought he died. All this stuff happened. When they brought him out and they did everything, they literally go back in time. I'm talking about the first one, not the ones with Kevin Hart. I'm talking about the very first one. When they go back to the Christmas party, because that's when the kids lost their parents, it was a Christmas party, and then they run into
Robin Williams?
when they run into Robin Williams them at his house, because it's his house. For those who don't remember the very original one, and the parents like, "Oh yeah, we're about to go leave and do something," and they all go, "No!"
We just heard bad weather or something like that.
Yeah, and
No. It was, "We have an important project that we need you to get started on right away. I'm sorry." And they're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, like they stopped them from going because the kids had told them our parents died during Christmas around this time, and they got caught in a bad storm.
Yeah.
And so when they went to the Christmas party, when they're not supposed to, the parents don't know who Robin Williams' character is, but the kids do.
Yeah.
So, and of course he married his sweetheart and everything like that.
Yeah.
So basically it reset itself into the point that it caught up to the modern time. So where when they moved into the neighborhood, they ran into him and then all of this stuff. And then they stopped the kids' parents from dying. So it's kind of similar to that in that sense of they went back and saved this girl from dying, and she, in her time, lived her life like she was supposed to. And the teacher realized he made a mistake. And so the future him finds out, then the past him figures it out. And the butterfly effect fixes everything.
Yeah, the butterfly effect fixes everything. It doesn't go quite that like wackadoodle because they only have 20 minutes to do this in. But yes, basically. So yeah. I guess it was a Jumanji type of thing if you really think about it like that. But it's still a better episode than...
Panera is a lie.
Okay.
But yeah.
That's a lovely statement. Thank you.
Sorry. I keep tying us in that damn commercial.
Quick little side note here for this particular episode. Shai's analogy for the Jumanji thing is not far off, but at the same time, not 100% correct, because she's specifically talking about the movie from 1995, whereas this particular episode aired in 1993. However, the original 1995 movie was also based off of a book series from 1981, so her analogy is both correct and not wholly correct at the same time. It's kind of an interesting little paradox, I suppose you could say. But yeah, I can see where she was coming from with this, trying to explain how she was reading the way that this was coming across for this episode. And admittedly, I was doing a terrible job of explaining it, so I can't say that I blame her for going this direction with it. As far as things go, I guess I could see where they took inspiration from the Jumanji books at the time. given that the books had been released in the early 80s, and most of these people working in production probably would have been children around that time. It makes good sense to where if they had read the books as a kid, they would turn around and be inspired enough to make an episode that takes inspiration from it. Now, whether or not that's wholly the case on either end, it's difficult to say. This sort of story is not exactly something that is surprisingly original in any regard. You've certainly, I'm sure, seen plenty of series out there that have done something very similar in the past and in the present. So take of that what you will. Who knows? It's one of those episodes where it's something that you could certainly interpret however you saw fit if it just worked in your favor. Logger 22 is still a great episode. It is an excellently well-paced episode that I absolutely think is a must-watch for anybody who is just interested in seeing a time travel story done solidly well, where the butterfly effect is not so overwhelmingly significant that it effectively changes everything around them to an insane degree. Because more often than not, when a butterfly effect takes place in a story, it's usually world warping, though not always. And because this was such a small singular incident, it makes good sense for why ultimately it didn't change everything in the entirety of the school, of the world, of everything around it. It just changed one single scenario wherein a not at all good teacher was pointed out to be as terrible as he was making himself out to be and wound up quitting. And as a result, a girl who originally died survived and then would go on to become a teacher, a principal, assistant principal, whatever she became in her own right, having returned to the school where she was originally supposed to die. It's an interesting little paradox, and it's kind of fun if you think about it. But that's just something to give a little thought to.
Okay, we're going to just go through this one real quick because it's a good episode. It's called The Tale of the Dream Machine. Basically, a typewriter is able to make...
what it writes to reality?
Yes, whatever it's right into reality. It starts as a dream, and then if it gets read out by someone, like vocally, then it actually makes it happen.
Oh, okay.
And so in order to just defeat this Deus Ex Machina typewriter, the person typing it then says, hey, read this out. The person reads out all these stories that ever took place from the writing of this typewriter never happened, and none of this ever happened, and this typewriter doesn't have this ability. The typewriter's own ability defeats itself.
No one thought to do that before? Or did no one not know that the typewriter was doing it?
The typewriter had originally been hidden in a stairwell. It was owned by the house was owned by someone else. The kid moved into this house, and it was a rundown mess of a house. So when they were going up a stairwell, one of the steps broke and they fell through. They found the typewriter, pulled it out. It was because of that typewriter that the man who originally owned it, which they didn't go too much detail into the man who originally owned the house. Like they did a little bit of like library research and found out who owned it, but that's about it. I guess he made himself rich and famous doing stuff like that. But the kid who would find it was just using the typewriter to tell his short stories because he was a little author, very much into writing his own stories and stuff. Found out through his friends having these dreams about exactly what he wrote, that this typewriter even had this ability, then tried to kind of more or less use that to his advantage by contacting the girl that he liked in her dreams and being like, hey, just so you know, this is a thing. This is not just a dream. This is also reality. Kisses her. Come to find out, of course, that she also likes him back. This is his way of telling her, because he's too nervous to say it in real life. And then says, call me after you wake up from this dream. She does.
Call me when you wake up.
Yeah. And,
So creepy.
I mean, they were friends.
I know, but still.
I know. It was the 90s. Some things were creepy.
It was the PG version of Freddy Krueger in this sense.
I guess. If you want to put it that way, sure.
That's creepy. Call me when you wake up. What?
Well, yeah, I guess. But
it's cutesy in this sense.
It was also cutesy in the fact that she was having a dream in a heavenly sky, so the setting was not creepy in its
Yeah, she's just thinking that she's dreaming of her friend.
Yeah.
That she had a crush on too. So it makes
Yeah.
sense since she liked him too. Okay.
Yeah. It wasn't as bad as you're making it.
I know it's not. I'm just saying.
But the point is that it's a very simple episode, not a whole lot of craziness going
I'm
on.
gonna tell you right now, if that typewriter existed in this world, I would need to find it. I wouldn't do nothing too bad. I wouldn't. But I would do something. That's all I'm gonna say.
Okay. So then we have The Tale of the Frozen Ghost. And this one is a little on the sadder side. This one actually had Melissa Joan Hart for her one singular appearance in the entire series as an actress in this show.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So the acting in this one is hit and miss. Like Melissa Joan Hart does great. The kid who she's having to babysit throughout this entire episode, not a great actor, but this is probably one of his very first roles as an actor. The kid who is the frozen ghost in all of this, again, not a fantastic actor, but he's literally only got one line that he repeats over and over and over again, which is simply, "I'm cold."
Which there's a way to do it to really impact it. You wouldn't think
It was actually really well done how they did it, because they edited it in such a way to where there was just enough of like a reverb going on in his vocals that it made his less than fantastic reading of these lines actually work in its favor. So it comes across kind of creepy. And then the two aunts of the boy that is being babysat by Melissa Joan Hart, they're hit and miss with their acting. Like really solid acting from one of them, and then the other one is kind of hit and miss, because when she starts telling these ghost stories, she gets into that sort of storyteller type of voice, that almost talks down to little kids. You know how that is with modern animation, with the way that. So she's hit and miss. Sometimes she's very believable, realistic sounding, and then other times she gets a little too theatrical with it. And all in all, what it's about is just this kid. He's spoiled by his parents. Like, he has all of this nice clothing and stuff like that. He's sheltered as all get out. They're so afraid of him getting sick from anything and everything.
Ironic.
Yeah. Many, many, many years prior to the aunts owning the home, there was like a thief who stole a bunch of gold and such from a bank or something, hid all that stuff in the stovepipe that is in the kitchen in that house. I guess either got caught or died before he could ever go back and get it. And all the while, the kid had grabbed the key that was used to open the stovepipe's hatch because he saw this guy hide all this stuff in there. So he took it in order to be able to not let him be able to simply come back and get it. And went and hid. Then the thief found him, stole his coat, and ran off, leaving the kid to die, who died freezing to death, which is why he's the frozen ghost. They find his jacket. In the modern day, these kids find his jacket, return it to him. He returns the key to them that would open the stovepipe, and then all that gold and stuff falls out. And I guess it's family wealth or something like that. Like maybe family owned the bank or something like that.
Yeah, so they got to keep it.
Yes, so they got to keep the gold, and they were at the time having major financial issues with not being able to afford to like keep heat running, keep electricity on, stuff like that. And then that solved all their wealth problems.
Okay, so let me ask you a quick question. The ghost, spoiled, didn't want to get sick. He saw the thief hide something.
No, not the ghost. The ghost was not spoiled.
So the modern
day kid, the modern day boy was spoiled.
Okay, so the ghost kid, who was he?
He was, they didn't actually explain who he was exactly. He was a resident of that house previously.
So he lived in the house?
Yes, he lived in the house.
Or was he a worker in the house?
No. He lived in the house.
Okay, so he lived in the house, saw the thief hide something in the stovepipe. He locked it so the thief couldn't go back in there?
Yes, and then took the key of the stovepipe with him.
and
Ran
he
off
didn't
and
go
got
home?
got caught by the guy as he was running away from his own house, because I guess this thief had broken into the house.
Okay, that makes sense. I was like,
Yes.
that okay.
I know.
Thank you.
I
Alright,
know.
that's what I need
Details.
to know. And
Details
so
I'm
he ran
missing.
into the forest, the thief. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Because I was like, something's not adding up with that.
Yeah, so real quick, my explanation for this entire episode is atrocious. Truly atrocious, really. Not entirely wrong. There are some details I did get right, like the fact that the man was a bank robber. But what I missed entirely was that this man was hired as a farmhand for these aunt's great grandfather way back when. He was advised not to hire this man on because he was suspicious, but the grandfather chose not to listen, hired him on. Come to find out that the man was actually a very famous bank robber, robbed a bank, went to hide his gold, whatever it was, in that stovepipe. The small child was either a grandchild or a son or whatever way back then, most likely the son, if I had to guess. He came home one day, caught the man hiding this gold into the stovepipe, chose to steal the key out of the stovepipe and run off with it, went and hid when he was being chased down by the robber in a small stump or a fallen log. And because it was a very cold winter day that day, he did have on a small red coat. But when the robber caught him, he stole the coat from the boy and left him to die. And because he was never found while the grandfather, mind you, or great-grandfather, I suppose in this case, was likely away at work doing something in order to be able to make up for the fact that it was the winter season, the boy wound up freezing to death inside that log. And as a result, the only thing that the boy really wanted out of it was just his red coat that would wind up being inside the log, but due to him being kind of intangible, was not able to physically grab the coat for himself. So what he was trying to do was just to get the two kids, the spoiled rotten boy and Melissa's character, to grab the coat, hand it to him so he could cover up, and then he disappeared happy as could be. It all was done. Dropped the key to the stovepipe, and they picked it up, put it in, and all was good. Prior to that, the stove was not working properly, and smoke would ventilate out into the room, so they had to open up windows. And bear in mind that while these two aunts were part of this family that was generationally wealthy on that side where the boy came from in the modern day, they were too proud to ask for any financial assistance while they were struggling. So they didn't have electrical power. They were going based off of just whatever they had to work with, and that included a fireplace, or rather a stovepipe in the kitchen, a wood-burning fire stove in the kitchen as their main source of heat, but not knowing all this time really that the biggest problem was simply that the stovepipe was blocked by this gold and by the flute not being able to be opened because of the missing key. Well, they knew that the key was missing, but because they couldn't find it and didn't know where it was and wasn't able to open it, they just had to hope for the best, not knowing that the stovepipe was blocked with all that gold. So when they opened up the stovepipe finally, with the key having been released and found, they wound up having all of this gold that the bank robber stole from the bank that day fall out into their stove. My point of coming in here on this was simply that I just missed quite a lot of detail. I could not for the life of me remember what this episode had going on in terms of the story element. I remembered the characters pretty well. I remembered certain details well. But as far as getting from point A to point B, I was not getting there. So this little explanation will hopefully help just a little bit. It's still a mess, but not too bad, I suppose, as far as the episode goes. I still like it. The character is effective. And like I said originally, the fact that this boy had the one line of "I'm cold," and he never really quite said it the same way twice, it resulted in him just being kind of awkward as far as a character went. And I think what they were trying to get the boy to do was to kind of shiver almost and effectively give off the idea that he was actually cold, but he wasn't able to get that across. So they had to do some after effects with his voice. Nothing crazy, just a bit of an echo reverb. And it wound up being effective enough to make him mildly creepy, especially since he really just stood there and said, "I'm cold." And that can, in its own way, be very effective. You don't necessarily have to have a whole lot going on in order for it to work. And so they took what wasn't working and made it work for themselves. And that's a good sign of some strong directors, writers, audio technicians that just knew what they were doing and ran with it. So there you go.
Okay, so The Tale of the Whispering Walls. That's a creepy title in and of its own right. And babysitter with a couple of kids she was babysitting. She drives past this house. Their engine of their car stops for some reason. Like it just dies on them. So they wind up in front of this house. They go up to that house. They ask if they can go in and use the phone. Because, I mean, this was the time frame when cell phones were not exactly commonplace.
Yep.
And upon entering, they find themselves in a situation where the house is haunted. The entire town surrounding this house, or nearby this house, a little down the road, is also ultimately haunted. The owner of the home is stealing the life essence of whoever comes in, that he tricks into this house. And he's tricking them into this house by causing the engine issues.
Okay.
He gets a hold of the babysitter. The kids are waiting out in the car. She's like, just wait out in the car. I'll come out as soon as I'm done with this phone call and whatever. She never shows up. It's been at least a good solid 20, 30 minutes, something like that. So they go into the house, go looking for her, can't find her. Then the owner of the house, the ghost owner of the house, shows up, tries to convince them to stay so he can also steal their life essences or whatever it is he's doing. They run off. They run into town. They meet up with a whole bunch of ghosts from all different time periods. So you've got a couple from the 1920s. You've got a door-to-door salesman from the 60s, a guy from the 1950s, and they're inside a bar is what they're inside. They're inside of a bar that had been all various different things throughout all this history. So I guess at one point in the 1950s, it was a sock hop or something. You know, they're trying to tell them, leave, don't come back. They kind of scare the kids just enough that they run out and they run back in, only to find out that this up and running bar is just vacant, empty, and run down and is no longer in functioning order. So they run back to the house and they go and try to find their babysitter. They get caught up in a whole bunch of mechanisms in this house because I guess he's built a whole bunch of traps in this house in order to be able to try to catch these people and keep them held there till he can steal their life essences. They finally find their babysitter. She's been hypnotized by this spirit into almost catatonic type of state, if you will. Like she's alive, she's functioning, but she's just blank stare, has nothing going on behind those eyes anymore. They finally get her to wake up back inside the town, inside the tavern. One of the ghosts there was an elder woman. She was probably one of the most recent victims. And she just looks at them and she says, "This is so sad. You look just like my grandkids." So she finds herself back in the house for a moment. The ghost lady, like she appears back in the house. And in order to betray this man, she opens the door and says, you get out and you take your babysitter with you. They run out. She saves them and stops him from being able to steal all of their soul, life essence, whatever it is. And then they get the car to start back up. They drive off. And then immediately comes the next guy.
So it just starts over again.
It starts all over again. It's on constant repeat. He's tricked them into such a situation where the car stops. If he fails to get his victim, he gets the next one that pops around the corner immediately thereafter. And it's in a constant loop.
So it's another ghost?
Yes, the main evil guy is a ghost, yes.
So why is he doing that if he's a ghost too?
Just to trap people and generally cause miserable mischief.
Oh, okay.
Like, I don't think he ever had a significant reason behind why he did what he did.
Oh, okay.
Or if he did, I don't remember what the explanation for the reason was. I think it was largely just he wanted to be in control.
Oh, okay. So he
So.
killed everyone in his town.
Pretty much. And over the course of many, many decades, like he's been doing this for centuries at this point. Hence the reason why you've got from all the way back in the 1920s and 50s and 60s. And this happening in the 90s and the most recent victim in the 80s or something like that. And maybe they'd had more victims than that, and those were just a small handful. You know? It was just, it's another one of those atmospheric episodes. The acting is solid, not terrible, not fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But it really, what made it so strong was just the atmosphere of a haunted mansion situation in a haunted town, in a haunted bar, by a bunch of ghosts, some of them that are just indifferent to the whole situation, some of them that actually want the better for the living, so that they don't wind up in the same situation. And then you got the evil guy who's just out to get as many souls as he can get. This is considered to be by far one of the very best episodes from the entire series period.
Mm-hmm.
It's called The Tale of the Shiny Red Bicycle. And this is another one of those stories where it's actually kind of sad and has a happy ending at the end of it more than anything. It's not so much scary. It's atmosphere in this, where a teenage boy is traumatized by having lost his friend, having died at least a good 5+ years in the past.
Okay.
What happened is they were down by a stream, a river, something like that, fishing, and it had a dam that would be opened up by a person controlling it to allow water to flow. Well, his friend had gotten down into that area underneath a bridge where that water would flow out under, had gotten stuck, and he wasn't able to save his friend. His friend drowns. He's traumatized by this. He's got severe PTSD. And mind you, the actor does a great job of depicting this PTSD. Like, it's really well done. His friend's ghost is appearing to him to say, this is going to happen again. History's about to repeat itself. You have the opportunity to save your little brother this time. But because of the situation where he's both traumatized by the past that he just cannot let go, and because of the fact that his friend is appearing to him now after all these years out of nowhere, and it's just scaring him. So he runs off before he gives his friend a chance to tell him what's going on, what's going to happen. He finally goes down, staying home from school that day or from whatever events they were doing with the fishing trip that day, because history is literally going to repeat itself that day. He goes out. He says, "What do you want? I'm not here to scare you. I'm just here to give you a second chance because your brother is going to wind up in the exact same situation. And we're not ready for him on the other side." They quite literally say that. We're not ready for him on the other side yet. It's not his time. This is your chance to save him so it doesn't happen again. And so he actually manages to do that. He saves his brother before the dam opens up and those rapids shoot down and drown him. And he had gotten his foot caught between some rocks and it like fractured something in there and sprained his ankle. So like his foot's messed up and he can't get out because that rock is crushing his foot. And his brother manages to get him out just in time before that water comes rushing down, saves him. And all the while, the entire reason that his friend's ghost was appearing was to deliver his bicycle to him to borrow. Like the shiny red bicycle was his friend's bicycle. And he delivers that bicycle to him in order to be able to allow him to get there as fast as he can. And then after he saved his brother, he takes a look at the bicycle, and the bicycle has completely just rotted. Like it has aged however many years were lost entirely. And so it had just been left sitting there by the lakeside for the past 5+ years.
So it was his friend's bike that they rode down there when he originally died. And the bike technically never left that spot. But his friend came back and gave him the bike to go.
No, I don't think that's what happened. I think it's literally just like it's a phantom bicycle that was made material.
Also had nothing. Okay.
It had nothing to do with that. It was just, here's your delivery device for being able to get yourself. The elder brother, something was wrong with his tires with his bicycle, so he stole his little brother's bicycle for a moment to get to school in order to get to those events. Well, of course, his little brother took his own bicycle there, so he didn't have a bicycle of his own, which is why his ghost friend delivered his bicycle to him to borrow.
To go. Okay. Good.
Yes, and then time just completely catches up on everything thereafter, and that bicycle just rots over the course of however many years was lost there. So it ages 5+ years, having basically effectively been out there all that time with however many years of weathering would take place there.
Okay.
So it rusts, it ages, it flakes all of its paint off. It still has a little bit of the red on it and whatnot. Very effective, honestly.
That's pretty cool.
And the episode is fantastic. It really is. Like, there's a reason that it is considered one of the best episodes because it's very emotionally effective.
Yeah.
And it's not super scary, but at the same time, the events that take place,
It gives
very real.
I feel like it's more of a thriller than a scare.
Yeah. But the events are very real because that boy could definitely have drowned. Like, it was a situation where he definitely could have drowned. So
My thing is, and this is just not with the show, just with shows like that in general. If you know, like clockwork, that dam is going to open at a certain time, why are we going down there?
right. I don't know if there was clockwork to it, but I would assume so with the dam that it would be a clockwork situation. Especially since they had a guy there who was getting ready to open the dam up anyway. Like,
yeah, like if you, because like back home, they don't do it very often. They open the dam in Beaver's Bend. They open it.
mm-hmm.
But there's signs and shit that tells you, first of all, don't go, don't be there.
Right.
But
well, what's the 90s? So maybe they didn't have that kind of stuff there. But you would think that if a kid died there, then they would have done a better job of like roping it off and stuff like that. Like they did. They fenced it off, tried to keep it from being an area.
But people are still going to go.
But still, the kid managed to get down in there anyway.
Yeah, people are still going to, even if you do it regardless. But it's one of those, like, if you know the days that is set for them to open it,
you don't go.
You don't go.
Right.
And if it happened, you're talking about history repeated itself 5+ years later, why are you going? Why are you? You know, your brother has been traumatized by this event that happened here. Did you just not believe him that happened or something? And you go to the exact same spot?
I think part of it is, well, they didn't really say this. I think part of it is that it was a time frame before therapy really has become much more of a common thing. So, like,
no, I'm saying like the brother, like the little brother saw the older brother go through this trauma.
I'm not sure that the little brother really did because I think he was too young to even really remember it. So all he knows is circumstantial effects following it.
But he still went to the same location.
Yeah, basically.
It's literally, it feels like one of those, like, it happened to you, can't happen to me type situations.
Yeah, very much that's like, what happened once before, that doesn't mean it's going to happen again. It certainly isn't going to happen to me.
Yeah, that's what that kind of feels like.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you saved him, though.
Yeah, it was a great, phenomenal episode. Really well told. Phenomenal pacing. And the acting is very good across the board. Like, the acting is really very good across the board. It's understandable why it's considered a favorite amongst many. Yeah. It's very much understood why. There's just something about Are You Afraid of the Dark where they really knew how to tell an emotional story and get it across so well.
Yeah, and my thing too, because like I said, I have not watched Are You Afraid of the Dark at all. That's why I'm listening and giving commentary here and there, because I liked it because every episode was different. Now, again, not just the ones that was like 2 parts, because like there's more to this, right? But it tells you in the beginning part 1, part 2, so you know.
Well, there were again only a couple of 2-parters throughout the entire initial series.
Like aside from just the occasional long story that took up 2 episodes, each episode was different. So it wasn't one of those just like, if you missed this part, you SOL.
Yeah,
it wasn't that. It was. Yeah. You missed this episode, you might catch it some other time, but this episode is going to be something completely different.
Yeah, almost every single episode, except for all of like 2 stories throughout the entire first 7 seasons of the franchise, were standalone. They might come back around in the future and do like a second story involving something similar to it or something like that.
So are they still making episodes? I thought they only did 10.
10 seasons?
Yeah. They're still making them?
Actually, the revival ran from 2019 to 2022, so they ended a couple years ago, and they are currently not doing anything right at the moment.
Okay.
And again, seasons 8, 9, and 10 are kind of their own animal because they are
one story,
one story per season across multiple parts, whereas the first 7 seasons are very much an anthology series.
And it gives you people who have short attention spans something to watch without having to
be pointing at yourself. I got a short attention span.
Yeah, my attention is like, okay, cool. And I don't feel too lost or feel too bad if I miss an episode. I can always, that's what reruns are for. You'd eventually see it again. But it wasn't one of those, oh shoot, I missed this episode for this week and completely lost. It's, oh shoot, I missed this episode. The next one
I can watch it again in the future when they rerun it.
Yeah.
So next up, we got Old Man Corcoran. This is an episode where basically what's happened is a couple boys have just moved to town. They were living in a rough neighborhood and their parents wanted them out of there. So they moved to this town. They are met up with by a group of kids who are this just little gang of whatevers, asking them to come and play hide and seek with them. This course happening in a graveyard, because of course it is.
Yep.
Of course. And it's happening at night, of course, because why not?
Here's my thing is, do they just know kids pop up in that town, or is it just like a specific area or something?
You know, they don't explain that. I'm assuming that it's kind of one of those situations where it's like, oh, we saw the moving van, we saw kids pop out, so therefore, I would assume that these kids, because mind you, these kids are the ghosts in all of this. They are like just constantly keeping vigil on all this stuff. I would assume
It has to be a certain area, because if that's the case, then it'd be, or that a certain, is it, are they living in a house?
yeah, well, it could very well be that these kids died in and they were all living in that house periodically over the course of time. Is what I'm thinking.
Because if that was the case,
So
then,
they keep an eye on that very same house all the time.
yeah, because that was the case, then every kid in town would be in jeopardy.
Right.
So it had to be just specifically that location in that area.
Yeah. And so they meet up with this gang of kids, and there's 6 or 7 of them, but only 3 or 4 of them are talking because they don't want to waste too much time on it. You've got one girl who she comes across as really hateful because she's like, you said I was going to be the last one, and that we weren't going to have any more added to the gang. And then the leading boy is like, well, we need some new players for our hide and seek game. And she's like, no. And all the while, what you're finding out is, while the kids are billing Old Man Corcoran as being the bad guy, he's actually not. He's the grave groundskeeper. He's a grave digger groundskeeper. And he's got nothing to do with any of this, really. These kids, these ghost kids, are tricking these other kids by also tricking them into believing that Corcoran is the bad guy in all of this.
Because if he sees them in there, he'll tell them.
Basically, yeah, something like that. They start their hide and seek game. They go to try to hide. There's a whole bunch of open grave sites, because of course there is. Presumably all these kids have come out of these grave sites, because mind you, they are the ghosts in this. And it's actually the lead boy of the gang who is the bad guy in all of this, because he's the one tricking these kids into playing hide and seek with him, because he's lonely and he just wants more people to play the game with. And he's tricking all these kids into playing hide and seek.
But here's my thing. If they're ghosts and he, as the groundskeeper, if they're popping out of their own graves, at some point I would get suspicious that I'm constantly
rebuilding these,
reburying, putting dirt in the same area.
Yeah.
So that would be my thing, is like, this is, every other, however many years pass or months pass, I'm having to
redo this.
Yeah, rebury or put dirt back into these same holes.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure. I feel like it was probably just, because remember, these are stories that are supposed to be told as though they were written by kids. So it could just be open grave. That's scary. So they're just open just to be open, even though that makes no logical sense for them to be open.
No.
So the logic isn't necessarily there with the episode, but the atmosphere is great, because haunted graveyard, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That's the epitome of just ideal atmosphere, really. And it's solid. So it's a great episode. Really.
I'm going off on a tangent, but it still deals with graveyard, so not really.
Uh-huh.
I went to one time back in my hometown, and it's where a lot of natives and stuff were buried. And it was a school during that time where they would take Native Americans to try to Americanize them, whatever. Oh, yeah. So, it's a lot of hauntedness going on there. There was one graveyard in particular. Mm-hmm. It had, now mind you, the scene was already set up for me, so I was already freaked out. Mm-hmm. But mind you, one graveyard had a tarp over it. Oh. And it had like these golems on top of it, like nailed in, so that the tarp could never be taken off.
Okay.
So the story behind that is that a person, they thought he was a vampire. They thought he was a vampire, and that his hand, like there's a hole where his hand can go through, and to like pull you down or to like get himself out. Mm-hmm. And so the people in that town covered it with a tarp, and they put these like golems, like guards around his gravesite, so he couldn't get out. And I thought it was a bunch of hogwash until we went out there, and no shit, someone literally had that set up. So they thought that the guy was going to rise from the dead, and so they made ways to cover it. Which, if you go in some parts of Europe, they do have that. They're caged.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I mean, we could go into a little bit of like Bram Stoker type history, and like there's actual stuff where back then when they believed that vampires were very much a real thing there in Transylvania and all those Romanian European areas back in that time frame, there were stories where there was this belief that a vampire could steal the life essence of somebody by just gradually making them sicker and draining them and whatnot. And so in order to be able to cure them and release them of this, they would have to like consume the ashes. Like they'd have to dig the person back up, burn them, the deceased body, burn that, and then have people like the sick person consume those ashes and whatnot in order to basically heal them and release them from that. Like
the more you know.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There was all sorts of different stuff on that. Like I don't know how much of that was fact, how much of that was fiction, how much of that was just nonsense. But there you go. I mean, it's some interesting stuff. Before,
sorry, that was the little tangent I had. But it was a graveyard.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I'm pretty sure my eyes was fucking with me, but I saw not here, but I saw there when we were at the graveyard, because again, the graveyard was right outside the gate of the school, like the boarding school they had. And it was said that one of the nurses or the nuns or whatever would patrol the halls with the candle. Shit you not, this was an abandoned place, mind you. Shit you not, I saw a candle coming down and say, if you don't start this fucking car and go. The car didn't want to start.
Oh.
The fucking car didn't want to start. I was like, you mess with me, because again, she told me the story the whole time. I'm like, you're just doing this to fuck with me.
See, I mean, that's calling back to the Whispering Walls. Too.
Yeah. I was thinking about that too. I was like, you're fucking with me because why didn't this car start? And you're just trying to freak me out, because I didn't believe it. I'm like, whatever. And I saw the grave. I'm like, oh, okay. Her car wouldn't fucking start. And I was like, and I kept seeing that candle come down. It was 3 stories. It was on the 2nd floor at this point. The bitch was coming to the front door. And I said, if you don't start this fucking car. We finally got it started right when the door was opening, and she finally like peeled out and we took off. So yeah, that was my experience. Happy Halloween.